But that's very interesting then, because then you're very immersed in that whole cycle again, and playing shows and doing promo like this, and then. So when do you think about a second album? Because the first one was sort of an accident, or was just for yourself. So
Yeah, I mean, like, it's not that I didn't want to do music anymore. I mean, I guess it was. Like, I told the label I wasn't going to tour on the record at all, because touring is really hard and you have to be away from your support system. And I was very, like, obviously emotionally fragile, and I didn't want to do that. But then, a year passed, and I was a lot stronger mentally, and it felt like, this is such a great opportunity to go on the Mitski tour. It was the first tour that I agreed to go on. And yeah, Dead Oceans was a huge part of it. Like, I had seen what Dead Oceans had done for my friends' careers, and was just like, I guess it's time to, like, throw my hat back in the ring. If you have a label like Dead Oceans, like, giving you the cosign, I feel like it's a really exciting thing, and you want to, have the opportunity to do it again. I definitely always wanted to continue making records, but I just didn't think that I was going to have the opportunity to financially, or yeah.
So when did kind of writing for what ended up being the second album start?
It started in, I think, December or November of or maybe October of 2015 or so. I knew that we were going to start. They wanted us to put out a record, like, pretty quickly. And they were like, well, we imagine you have, like, plenty of other material. And I was just like, yeah, totally. And then started writing in October, demoing stuff out. And then we spent, like, a month in the studio. I worked with Craig Hendricks, who co-produced the album and also performed all the instruments with me and arranged it with me. And he also plays in the live band now. And yeah, we just kind of pounded it out in December for a month in his studio in Philadelphia. And then we mixed it with George Elbrecht, who sometimes plays in Ariel Pink, is an amazing producer and mixer. And then, yeah, it was done in February, and now it's coming out in July.
Okay, this is quite a quick process.
Yeah, I write pretty quickly, but I enjoy, like, kind of that intuitive, like, at some point you have to put it away.
In that sense, because you mentioned these people that you work with, but the initial songwriting, is that a very solitary thing for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where do you start? Generally, because I suppose it's different each time.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of follows a similar pattern. Some songs I actually was able to write in the studio. I mean, it's still, like, a very alone process. Like, Craig would be, like, putting together a track, or, like, working on, like, mixing something, or, like, getting the drums down or whatever, and I'd be in the other room just starting on another song. And it usually starts with some kind of riff, and I have, like, a book of notes of just things that I've observed or read, and I'll, like, latch onto one line and kind of, like, expand a story around, like, one line. So, like, for Diving Woman, I think the first line, it's usually the first line, honestly, is just kind of like the thesis statement of the song, and then I just kind of build it on from there, and I just, it's like a really strange process. It's kind of like, I imagine most musicians are kind of just responding to voices in their head, you're just kind of following whatever, like, you think that you hear somewhere in the back of your brain, and then you just kind of channel that. But then also some of the songs were songs that I had redone for, they were just shitty demos, like lo-fi demos. There's a song on the record that used to be a Little Big League song, actually, and I just hated the way that we arranged it so much. It just totally ruined the song for me, so I just felt like it deserved another chance. I wanted to watch it, like, really breathe and move from section to section, and that was something that we were able to do on this record.
So, obviously, Psychopomp was a personal record. It was a difficult time. What was your mindset, or was the kind of the atmosphere doing the second one? Was it easier to do, or?
I think it was harder. I mean, it was like, I mean, in some ways it was easier because I definitely felt like this newfound, like, confidence of like how to direct an album, and by then it was like the fourth album I had put together, with the two Little Big League records and the last Japanese Breakfast record. It felt like I had matured quite a bit, and I felt very comfortable in that arena. But in some ways it was harder because there was expectation. It was like very nerve-wracking knowing that I was going to submit it to someone that was waiting for it, and there was a deadline, and I didn't know you know, Dead Oceans all that well. I didn't know how they would respond to it. I didn't know if they were going to ask me to change anything. So I was very nervous about it at first, a lot of anxiety, but I tried to approach it in the same way that I did every other record that I've made, of just, you know, I can only make what comes naturally to me. So this record is still very personal. I tried to make it a not personal record, and it failed. You know, it was kind of like, I wanted to make like a science fiction concept album, and Machinist was the first song that I wrote, and I kind of think that I was drawn to do that because I felt like, you know, Psychopomp is my grief record, and it's about my mom, and I can't write another one. But then I realized really quickly how absurd of an idea that was, that that there would come a point in time where my mother's death would not always be a part of my life.
Right.
I will write about it forever, I'll think about it forever. I'm a completely different person after that happened. So a lot of the songs, I think, are just about the last year of just, you know, it was kind of like this really conflicted year, because on the one hand, you know, I had got married, and I also, for the first time, was being celebrated as an artist. I had my dream job, and the record was doing well. This is something that I wanted my whole life. But it was kind of like shrouded in this like very dark, like it was almost like my mom had to die in order to give birth to this like weird career. It was a very strange thing. It almost felt like very like serendipitous, that was like maybe something that she was leaving behind to me, which is a silly idea, but you know, it's comforting sometimes to think about. But yeah, so it was kind of about that experience, you know, the year spent on the road, and just like my feelings about death, like with a little bit more distance behind it, you know, because Psychopomp was written 2 months after she died, and this record was written about 1.5 years after she died. So, you know, my feelings about death in general are very different, and her are very different. So.
Right. And then one of the words, and I think you've mentioned this before, but I underlined, is the resilience, kind of the idea of I don't know if coping is the right word, but so obviously that was a big part of your life then, but was it difficult writing those things down?
I think that I'm always like writing things down. I think that this record, more than anything, in that time period, I was really impressed with myself, like, because I just experienced so much trauma, witnessing like the deterioration of someone's body, and I was so close to it as like I was very much a primary caretaker for 6 months, and that was so hard. It just feels like you lost, you know, you just lost a battle, you know, and there's this weird guilt, and there's just so much stuff to undo, and I just I had locked away so many feelings because I just felt like it was my job to just be this positive light, that I couldn't really indulge in any of my own emotions. So I spent the year like really trying to undo that, or like really just trying, you know, I've always been someone that's like really errs on the side of darkness. I always get very easily depressed individual. And I was so afraid that if this time I let myself become depressed, I would just never get out of it. So I really strove to like take it day to day and really just fight my way into just staying really busy and having a routine and being really productive and writing all the time, and just trying to express myself and put myself out in the world and give something. And that was really hard and challenging, but you know, I think that a lot of the songs are about just like, you did a good job, like you're okay, you came out of this, and also realizing that, you know, I spent a lot of time on the road meeting other kids who lost parents much younger than me, and how hard that must have been for them. So many of these kids like came to me telling me about, you know, their parent that they lost to cancer, or going through chemo, or their friends, and that was so hard, but it also just made me like, you know, think of the world in such a bigger way, of just like, you know, sometimes that big tragedy like really opens up the world to you, that makes you realize like how much pain there is that's shared, and I think a lot of the record is about that. Yeah.
And for you yourself then, because you mentioned this, that your intention was to write a science fiction concept album, so is there still for you yourself a narrative through it all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like I was really fascinated by like at the time I was reading my friend had just applied for the Mars One project. Are you familiar with this?
Slightly.
Yeah, and so he applied for the Mars One project, and he was rejected. But around the same time, there was like Time, you know, they had narrowed it down to 100 people, and Time magazine had profiled all these people, and I was reading about it, and I thought it was just so interesting that these were a lot of young people, because you have to train for 10 years, and then you have to go, you know, colonize Mars. And they had families, and that they were just willing to give it all up for science and progress, and I was really fascinated by that. And I think so. It was just like a combination of just observing what was going on in the world and thinking about my own life. And yeah, so I think that those themes kind of like, you know, were a little bit melded together a little bit, you know. In some ways I felt like I was like a robot sometimes because I just felt like so devoid of emotion. I felt like I spent so much time like disassociating from this tragedy that I was really going through day to day kind of robotically, and so I think that those kinds of themes are present in there as well.
Finally then, because you mentioned the pressure kind of that you felt on the second record now that things are going well. So I assume the album has been done for a little bit and it won't be released until
July 14th.
July 14th,
yeah.
sorry. But so what is this period like, these couple of months
It's
later?
horrible. It's so horrible. I tried to focus on, I think that when we finished tracking, the last 4 months were just hell because I hadn't even released a single and I was so nervous and I made this video and it just like, you create all this stuff and you can't share it with anyone and it almost doesn't feel like there's a complete like, you know, there's like a press release, but it's just an emotional release to like just serve it to the world, you know? And I was so nervous and I just built it up in my head that everyone was gonna hate it and like, it was just really nerve-wracking, you know? And then once the single came out, it was like such a relief. Even if people had like bad things to say about it, it was just like I had already like said everything in my head and that to have it out in the world was just so much easier. But yeah, it's a hard time. I tried to just focus on making more stuff and making more videos and just kind of like completing like the full like process of the album. You know, there's so many different elements like between like the art and like the extra pre-order stuff and the videos. It's like I really like to have a hand in all of that. It's really fun for me. So I just try to keep creating and yeah, I mean I love the album and I hope other people too. But you know, we'll see what they think.
Michelle, thank you very much for your
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you.